Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've always loved the rails. There's something about the hum of the engine, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against steel, and the way the world rushes past in a blur of color. As a train driver, I've spent years guiding massive machines through the landscape, ferrying people and cargo across cities and countryside. It's a job that requires patience, precision, and an almost instinctive understanding of the locomotive. But nothing in my years of experience prepared me for what happened on that night. It started like any other shift. I was assigned to an overnight freight run, taking a long line of cargo from one end of the state to the other. It was a quiet, uneventful route, one I had driven dozens of times before. The sky was dark, the stars barely visible through the thick clouds, and the tracks stretched ahead like endless ribbons of steel. The first sign that something was wrong came through the radio. I had just passed a small town when a garbled transmission crackled through my headset. At first, I thought it was just interference, static breaking up a dispatcher's voice, but then I caught fragments of words. Panic, screaming, a plea for someone to respond. I adjusted the volume, frowning. Repeat, this is train 4172. You're breaking up. More static. Then a voice, frantic and barely understandable. Off the roads, do not, out of control, there, and then silence. I slowed the train slightly, a creeping sense of unease settling over me. Dispatchers don't panic like that. They deal with emergencies all the time. Derailments, mechanical failures, even the occasional fire. But this was different. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe I had misheard. I had a schedule to keep and stopping wasn't an option. So I pushed the throttle forward and pressed on into the night. But the feeling didn't go away. A few miles later, I saw the first real sign that something was wrong. Up ahead, near an old, abandoned station, there were lights. Vehicles stopped on the tracks. Headlights beamed in different directions, casting long shadows against the trees. It looked like a pileup, but that made no sense. No one should have been out here. As the train drew closer, I saw movement. People running, stumbling, some falling, others chasing them. I reached for the horn, blasting a long, deep warning. If there was an accident, I needed them to clear the tracks. But no one reacted. They just kept moving in a chaotic frenzy. I gritted my teeth. The train wasn't stopping, not for this. And then, in the glow of my headlights, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. A man lunged at a woman, knocking her to the ground. But it wasn't a fight. He wasn't attacking her like a person would in desperation or anger. He moved like an animal, like something that had lost all sense of being human. And the woman, the way she screamed, the way she struggled, the way she stopped moving. I pulled the whistle again, a desperate, useless warning. The train was barreling toward them, unstoppable, relentless, and for the first time in my career, I had no idea what I was heading into. Something was very, very wrong, and I was about to be trapped in the middle of it. I couldn't stop. Not in time. Not with that much weight behind me. A fully loaded freight train doesn't come to a sudden halt, it takes miles. The people, or whatever they were, didn't move. They didn't even react. The massive locomotive bore down on them, steel and momentum turning everything in its path into dust and debris. I squeezed my eyes shut for half a second as the impact came, the sickening thud vibrating through the engine, through my bones. I opened my eyes in time to see bodies tumbling away from the train, thrown like rag dolls. But some of them got back up. I gripped the controls tighter, my knuckles white. What was I looking at? The radio crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer, a different dispatcher, their tone sharp and urgent. Train 4172, come in. Do you copy? I grabbed the receiver. This is 4172. What the hell is going on out here? Do not stop, the voice barked. Do not slow down. Keep moving at all costs. My mouth went dry. What? The transmission cut out, just gone. No static, no interference. Just silence. I turned my gaze back to the tracks ahead. The chaos faded behind me, swallowed by the darkness. But that eerie, sinking feeling only grew stronger. I needed more information. Reaching for my phone, I tapped at the screen, trying to pull up the news. Nothing, no signal, no data. That was strange. But maybe the storm clouds had knocked something out. I switched to the onboard system, attempting to reconnect with the main dispatch hub. Still nothing. That's when I noticed something else. The towns I passed, normally lit up by streetlights and homes, were dark, pitch black. No neon signs, no glowing windows, just empty buildings and abandoned streets. Something had happened, and I was rolling straight through the middle of it. I checked my schedule. The next major stop was nearly 20 miles ahead, a decent-sized city where I was scheduled to switch lines. If something serious was going on, there would be people there, authorities, someone who could tell me what was happening. I kept my speed steady, pushing forward through the night. The rails stretched endlessly in front of me, cutting through forests and open fields. But every now and then in the distance I saw things moving, figures darting between trees, shapes shifting in the darkness. And then, just past an old rail bridge, I saw the next sign that the world had gone wrong. A train, not moving, sitting dead on the tracks ahead a few miles out. I squinted, my headlights illuminating the metal body. It was another freight engine, just like mine. But something was off. The doors were open, the cabin lights flickering. Some of the cars behind it had derailed. The steel bent and twisted like something had forced them off the tracks. I eased off the throttle slightly. I didn't want to slow too much, not after that dispatcher's warning, but I needed to be ready to react. If the tracks were blocked, I was in trouble. As I got closer, I spotted movement near the engine. Shapes clambering up the side, forcing their way into the cabin. People? No, not people. They moved wrong. Their limbs jerked at unnatural angles. Their heads twitched, snapping from side to side like they were listening for something. And then, as my headlights swept over them, they turned toward me. Dozens of them. I slammed the throttle forward. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if I was dreaming, if I'd lost my mind, or if the world itself had decided to tear apart at the seams. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't stopping. Not for anything. The engine roared as I pushed the throttle to its limits. My heart pounded. My breath came in short gasps, but my hand stayed steady on the controls. The other train was close now, too close. If those things were blocking the tracks, I was running out of time. The figures on the abandoned locomotive twitched and turned, their hollow eyes glowing in the glare of my headlights. Some of them started moving, scrambling down from the cab, leaping from the freight cars like wild animals. They weren't running away. They were coming toward me. I gritted my teeth and laid on the horn, long, deafening, a blast of pure force. The steel beast beneath me was unstoppable, a wall of metal and speed that wouldn't yield for anything. But still, they didn't react like normal people would. They didn't flinch, didn't run, didn't even hesitate, they just kept coming. The first impact rattled through the cabin as bodies struck the front of the locomotive. The sound of it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, like hitting something dense, but hollow at the same time. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the tracks ahead, blocking out everything else. A sharp thunk echoed from above. I froze. Something had landed on the roof. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My train was moving too fast for anything to just jump onto it. Whatever was up there, it had climbed on. I swallowed hard and grabbed the nearest heavy object, a rusted wrench from my toolkit. Not much use against whatever was out there, but better than nothing. My fingers hovered over the emergency brake lever, but I hesitated. Stopping out here? With those things swarming? That was a death sentence. Another thump closer this time. I forced myself to breathe. Then, from just above the windshield, a hand slammed against the glass. It wasn't normal. Too pale. Fingers too long. Nails cracked and broken. It dragged downward, leaving behind a streak of something dark and sticky. My chest tightened. A face appeared next, upside down in my view. A slack, open mouth. Eyes black and lifeless. But it was moving. It was alive. I didn't think. I didn't have time to. I grabbed the wrench and swung. Hard. The glass shattered on impact, sending shards flying. The thing let out a sound, some horrible wet noise. But I didn't stop. I hit it again, knocking it back. It lost its grip and tumbled off the side of the train, vanishing into the darkness. I gasped for air, my hands shaking. The wind roared through the broken window, cold and sharp against my skin. My knuckles were bleeding. I barely even felt it. But I was still alive. I forced my attention back to the tracks. The other train was behind me now, fading into the night. The tracks ahead were clear, for now. But something was horribly, horribly wrong with the world. And I was on my own. The wind howled through the shattered windshield, stinging my face with icy fingers. My pulse still thundered in my ears, but I forced myself to focus. The train was still moving. I was still alive. For now. The tracks stretched ahead, vanishing into the night. I needed to reach the next city. If anyone was still out there, authorities, military, anyone, they'd be there. I just had to hold out a little longer. But deep down, I already knew. The world wasn't the same anymore. I grabbed the radio and tried again. This is train 4172. Is anyone out there? Repeat, this is train 4172, requesting emergency response. Static. Then a voice. Faint, buried beneath the interference. Don't stop. Danger. I pressed the button. Repeat that. Who is this? The static swallowed the response. I swore under my breath and slammed the radio back into place. That's when I saw the lights. Faint at first, a soft glow in the distance. But as I got closer, it grew brighter, spreading along the horizon. A city. The next stop, civilization. Relief surged through me until I noticed something was wrong. There were fires. Buildings burned in the night, smoke curling into the sky like ghostly tendrils. The streetlights flickered, some shattered completely, and in the glow of the chaos I could see them, hundreds of them, maybe more, moving through the streets like a flood. The entire city was overrun. I tightened my grip on the throttle. I can't stop here. The train was supposed to slow down before entering the rail yard, but I didn't dare. If I lost momentum, if something blocked the tracks, I was done for. Then I saw the bridge. A massive overpass stretched above the tracks, a main highway that led into the heart of the city. Cars were scattered across it, abandoned in every direction, but some weren't empty. Figures darted between the vehicles. Some ran. Others crawled. Then, as if drawn by the sound of my train, they started jumping. I barely had time to react. A body landed with a sickening thud on one of the freight cars behind me. Another followed, then another. My stomach twisted. They were getting on the train. I had nowhere to go, no way to fight them off. If they reached the cab... Think. I scanned the dashboard, my mind racing. The emergency brake? No, that would leave me trapped. The only option was to speed up, to shake them off before they reached me. I yanked the throttle forward. The engine roared as the train surged ahead, metal shrieking against metal. A thump on the roof, then another. Closer. I grabbed the wrench again, my hands slick with sweat. My breath came in ragged gulps. And then a hand reached down from the roof hatch. Fingers curled around the edge. It was coming inside. The fingers curled over the edge of the roof hatch, pale and twitching. Then came the other hand, gripping tight as something pulled itself down into the cabin. I didn't think. I swung. The wrench connected with its arm, a sickening crack cutting through the howl of the wind. It didn't react like a normal person would. No scream, no flinch. It just kept coming, dragging itself through the opening with an unnatural, jerky motion. For the first time, I saw it up close. Its face was gaunt, the skin stretched too tight over the bones. Its eyes, black, hollow pits, fixed on me with eerie focus. The mouth hung open, lips cracked and dry, like it had been screaming for hours and run out of sound. I swung again harder. The impact knocked it sideways, but not off completely. Its grip tightened. It was strong. My pulse pounded. I had seconds before it was inside completely. The train. I had one chance. I dropped the wrench and grabbed the controls, slamming the throttle even further forward. The train lurched, the engine roaring as we hit a long, uneven stretch of track. The thing lost its grip. For a split second, its body lifted, weightless in the air. And then it was gone, ripped away by the wind, tumbling into the darkness. I gasped for air, gripping the dashboard as my arms trembled. My hands were bleeding. From what, I wasn't even sure. I barely felt it. The train hurtled forward, the city now fading behind me. But I wasn't safe yet. More of those things were still on the freight cars. I could hear them, scratching, thumping, moving closer. I needed to think fast. I flipped through the onboard controls, searching for something, anything that could help me. Then I saw it. The coupler release. The cars behind me. If I could detach them, I could get rid of whatever was back there. The train hit another rough section of track, shaking violently. Time was running out. I reached for the manual override, fingers slick with sweat. One deep breath, pulled the lever. A metallic clank rang out behind me. The cars lurched, shuddering as the weight separated. Then, silence. I turned in time to see them vanish into the night. Figures still clinging to the freight cars, scrambling in confusion as they drifted away, slower and slower. And then an explosion of fire. The derailed cars must have hit something. Maybe a gas line, maybe another wreck, I didn't know. But the flames erupted into the sky, casting an eerie orange glow against the landscape. For the first time, I felt something close to relief. I was alone again. But I wasn't safe, because up ahead, just visible in the distance, was another obstacle. Something massive, something blocking the tracks. And I was heading straight for it. I squinted through the shattered windshield, my eyes burning from the wind and smoke. Up ahead, something huge loomed over the tracks, barely visible in the darkness. I adjusted the cabin lights, trying to make sense of it. Then my stomach dropped. It was a derailed passenger train. The metal body lay twisted and broken across the tracks, carriages piled up in a tangled mess, windows shattered, doors torn open. It hadn't just crashed, it had been attacked. I had seconds to react. Slamming the brake wasn't an option. Stopping a freight train at full speed would take miles, and I didn't have that kind of distance. If I didn't act fast, I'd slam into that wreck and derail just like it did. My mind raced. Think. I grabbed the radio again. This is train 4172. Emergency situation. Blockage on the main line. Requesting alternative route. Nothing. Just static. I gritted my teeth and checked the track diagram. There, a siding track branching off just before the wreck. It was my only option. But switching tracks at this speed? It was insanely dangerous. I reached for the manual switch override, my hands trembling. If I timed it wrong, the train would tip over. If the rails weren't stable, I'd derail. If the siding was blocked, no time for doubt. I pulled the lever. The steel groaned beneath me as the train veered off the main line, wheels screaming against the rails. My body slammed into the side of the cabin as momentum fought back. For a terrifying moment, I felt the train tilt, one wrong move, and I'd tip. 1 second too late, and I'd crash. The wreck rushed past my side window so close I could see the inside, blood-stained seats, broken glass, unmoving figures. Then, the train leveled out. I sucked in a breath, my hands aching from gripping the controls too tight. I made it. But I wasn't safe yet. The siding track stretched through an abandoned industrial yard, old factories, rusted-out storage tanks, towering stacks of shipping containers. The kind of place that felt wrong even in normal times. And it was crawling with movement. Shapes darted between the shadows. Dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't just wandering anymore. They were waiting. I tightened my grip on the throttle. They knew I was here. And they weren't going to let me leave. The industrial yard swallowed the train in rust and darkness. Crumbling factories loomed on either side of the tracks, their shattered windows like empty eyes watching me. Stacks of forgotten shipping containers rose high, casting long, jagged shadows in the flickering light of distant fires. And within those shadows they moved. At first, it was just a flicker, figures darting between metal husks, slipping behind broken-down machinery. Then, as my headlights swept the yard, I saw them clearly. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They weren't like the ones I'd seen before. These weren't mindless, wandering husks. These were faster, smarter. They were waiting. A chill ran through me. I tightened my grip on the controls, forcing the train forward. Don't stop. Keep moving. But then, just up ahead, the tracks were blocked. A pile of debris, scrap metal, old train parts, wrecked vehicles, heaped across the rails. I couldn't go through it, couldn't go around it. I had nowhere to go. I glanced at the speed gauge. Slowing too much would be suicide. If they swarmed me, it was over. My mind raced. There, on the left. A second track, barely visible under the grime and rust, veered off toward an old freight depot. I didn't know where it led, if it even connected back to the main line, but I didn't have a choice. I reached for the manual switch controls. A sudden thump on the side of the train nearly made me jump out of my skin. Something was climbing. I glanced out the side window and saw them latching onto the train as I slowed, pulling themselves up with unnatural strength. Their hollow eyes locked onto me. Their hands clawed at the metal, dragging themselves closer. My chest tightened. I pulled the switch lever. The train lurched hard, wheels grinding as it shifted onto the side track. The sharp turn sent several of the creatures tumbling off their bodies, smashing against the steel. But not all of them. A dozen or more still clung on, crawling toward the engine. I grabbed the wrench again, my breath ragged. They were coming inside. The train rumbled down the rusted sidetrack, deeper into the industrial wasteland. My hands shook on the throttle, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The creatures were still on the train, climbing, crawling, getting closer. A metallic bang echoed from above. Then another. They were on the roof. I grabbed the wrench tighter, eyes flicking between the windshield and the roof hatch. If they got inside, I wouldn't let them. Another thud. Louder. Closer. I spun toward the roof hatch just as something slammed against it from above. The metal buckled. A long pale arm forced its way through fingers clawing at the air. I reacted without thinking, swung the wrench as hard as I could. The impact crunched against bone. The arm recoiled. A shrill, inhuman noise echoed from above. But it wasn't alone. More hands appeared, more bodies dropping onto the roof. The train jolted. One of them must have slipped under the wheels, a sickening crunch barely audible over the engine's roar. I had seconds. Ahead, the rusted tracks veered toward an old freight depot. If I could just make it through, maybe I could lose them. The roof hatch buckled again. A face appeared through the gap. Mouth open, eyes empty, arms reaching. I grabbed the wrench with both hands and drove it down with all my strength. The thing fell back with a twisted, guttural noise, disappearing into the night. But more were coming. Then I saw something ahead, a dead end. The tracks ended at a set of old loading bays, rusted metal barriers sealing the way forward. I had no way out, no more track, no escape. And then, like an answer to a silent prayer, I saw a derailleur. A manual switch that could throw the train off the tracks before it hit the wall. If I timed it perfectly, I could crash into the depot, survive the wreck, and get out on foot. If I failed, I'd either be crushed inside the engine or trapped under the wreckage. But it was better than the alternative. I reached for the lever. The roof groaned. They were breaking through. No more time. I pulled the switch. The train lurched violently, the wheels shrieking as they left the rails. The world spun. Metal screamed. The impact hit like a truck, the front of the train slamming through the depot wall in a deafening explosion of concrete and steel. I was thrown forward, smashing into the controls, pain flaring through my body. The lights flickered, sparks rained down. Then, silence. I coughed, gasping for air. My head throbbed, my vision swam, but I was alive. I forced myself up, limbs aching, ears ringing. The wreck was a twisted mess, steam hissing from the ruined engine. No movement, no sounds. I had bought myself time. I stumbled toward the broken depot doors, dragging myself into the open. The city loomed in the distance, burning in the night. I didn't know where I'd go next. Didn't know if anyone was left. But I was still breathing. Still moving. And as long as I could do that, I wasn't done yet. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.